So hello and welcome back, grade 12s. In today's lesson we are starting with unit 3, responding to the environment, and we will be looking at how humans respond to the environment. In this lesson we will be learning more about the human eye. So first of all we have the different parts of the eye. So I'm going to start at the back of the eye. So we have the posterior cavity with the vitreous humor. So that's like the fluid in the eyeball. That we can see all this of that. And then we have the sclera. So this is our white part of the eye. The layer inside of that, indicated in pink over here, is called the choroid. And then the layer inside of that, the yellow layer, is the retina. Okay. Now on the retina, we see this little indent, which is referred to as the yellow spot with the fovea humor. And then we also have the optic nerve, which leaves the eye, and right at the top there, where the optic nerve leaves the eye, we have the blind spot. Okay. And then here at the front of the eye, we have the ciliary muscles. So those are on both sides of the pupil. And then we have the sensory ligaments, which are these indicated in brown. Okay. Also on both sides of the pupil and the lens. Then we have the iris. So that is the color of your eye. So here, these two little pinky things here in front. And then the pupil, which is the opening in the eye, which leads to the lens that you can see here. Then we have the aqueous humor in the anterior chamber. So again, that's like the fluid here in the front. And then we have the conjunctiva, and just below that we have the cornea. Okay. So the internal structure of the eye consists of three main layers. So those layers are the outer fibrous layer, and this is made up of the sclera and the cornea. So the layers here on the outside in this light bluish grayish color. Then we have the middle vascular layer, which is made up of the choroid, the ciliary body, the iris, and the lens. So that is everything inside of that, the pink layer, and the iris, which is also indicated in pink here, and the lens, right? And then we have the inner light sensitive retina, which is the pigment layer and the nerve tissue layer it consists of. So that is the yellow layer in this eye. Okay, so those are the three major layers of the eye. And now we look at the function of each of these parts of the human eye. So the function of the conjunctiva, so that is like the little lens over the top, the structure here indicated in black. It produces mucus and tears to protect and lubricate the eye. And then we have the sclera. Now the sclera is a strong white inelastic layer of the eye. So that is the white part of your eye. If you were to look in a mirror, that is the white part of your eye. And its function is to protect the internal part of the eye, and it helps to maintain the eye's spherical shape. In other words, it helps to keep the eye in its rounded shape. And then it also serves for muscle attachment. So you can see here that these muscles, they connect to this sclera. Then we have the cornea, which is transparent, and it's at the front part of the sclera, so here over here. And the reason why it's a transparent layer is because it has to allow the light through in order for the light to actually reach the other layer, which will then produce our image. And then also the curvature of this specific lens causes refraction of light rays. So the curvature of this cornea causes refraction of the light rays. So in other words, it bends the light in the right way so that it is actually able to reach at the back of the retina, the correct spot, so an image can be produced. Then we have the choroid. Now this is a thin, darkly pigmented layer. And the reason why it is pigmented is because the pigment has to absorb excess light rays to prevent internal reflection, which may cause blurred images. Now, if you were to think of like a white page, light reflects off of that, and then the light rays would bounce around in this eyeball, and you will not have a clear image. So that is why it is very important for this layer to actually absorb that light, and that is also why it has to be dark, right? Then the ciliary body, thickening of the front part of the choroid, which consists of ciliary muscles. So those are these thickenings that you can see over here. They make up the ciliary muscles, which makes up the ciliary body. They contract and relax to change the curvature of the lens during eye accommodation. So in other words, these muscles control the shape of the lens, and the lens we will get to now, but that's very important to bend the light so that the light reaches the correct spot here at the back of the eye and an image can be produced. So these muscles are extremely important in controlling this shape of the lens, and if those muscles do not do their work properly, a clear image will not be produced. Then we have the iris. So this is the round colored structure which contains the radial and circular muscles. So that is the colored part of your eye, so the blue, the green, the brown, whatever color your eyes are. And the iris is very important to regulate the amount of light that enters the eye by controlling the size of the pupil. So this is because the pupil is an opening in the middle of the iris, and light rays enter the eye through the pupil. So basically the pupil is like a little hole, and the iris controls the size of this little hole in order to regulate the amount of light that can go through. Because obviously if the hole is bigger, more light is able to go through, and if the hole is smaller, less light will go through. Now, if the light goes through the pupil, it reaches the lens. And the lens is transparent and biconvex, and it can change its shape. This is very important because the lens bends the light as it goes into the eye in order to ensure that it reaches the correct spot on the retina. So it changes its shape to refract the light rays from near or far objects to form a clear image on the retina. Now, this bending of the light obviously also has to do with the distance you are from this specific object. So whether that object is near or far. Then we have the suspensory ligament. So this keeps the lens in position and changes its shape. So again, those are these muscles, and they are the ligaments here in brown, and they are very important in controlling the shape of the lens and making sure that it is a bit more concave or a bit more convex, depending on how much the light needs to be bent based on our distance from this specific object. And then we have the retina. So the retina lines the inside of the eyeball, and it consists of two major layers, the pigment layer and the nerve tissue layer. Now the pigment layer, again much like the choroid, is a dark pigment that absorbs light rays and prevents internal reflection. So again, preventing that bouncing around of the light on the white surface. And then also the nerve tissue layer consists of two types of photoreceptors. Now these are referred to as rods and cones. So the rods are responsible for our black and white vision, and they are stimulated in low light intensity. And then the cones are responsible for our bright and colored vision, and they are stimulated in high light intensity. So those are the different parts of this nerve tissue layer and what they are responsible for. Then we have the yellow spot. So this is a spot on the retina that contains many cones and few rods. And because of this, the clearest, most accurate image is formed right here on this yellow spot that you can see here. Okay. Then we have the optic nerve, and like nerves do, they conduct nerve impulses. So the optic nerve leaves the back of the eye, as you can see here, and it conducts nerve impulses to the cerebral cortex of the brain where they are interpreted. And then the blind spot, which you can see over here, is where the optic nerve leaves the eye. So no nerve impulses are conducted to the brain from that specific spot. Okay, and then obviously these nerve impulses need to reach the brain. That is why we have this optic nerve, in order for our brain to actually interpret the image that our eyes are seeing. Then we have the aqueous humor. Now the aqueous humor can be found in the anterior chamber. So that is between the cornea and the lens. So like here we have in our picture here at the front. But then there's also a posterior chamber. So this is then between the iris and the lens. So where there's also a fluid. And then this is important because it maintains the shape of our eye. Okay. And then we have the vitreous humor. And like we said, that is in the posterior cavity. So everything behind the lens. And that maintains the shape of the eye and holds our retina in position. Okay, so the retina is the layer here, so it holds that whole layer in position because it fills this entire space. Okay, and then it is also important because it refracts the light rays to form a sharp image. So again, this fluid bends the light in order to form a sharp image. So then we have two mechanisms that we are going to look at now that you should not confuse. The first one is the pupillary mechanism. So this is also called the pupil reflex, and this is because this is something that happens to our eyes without us thinking about it. It's something that your eye just naturally does. So with this mechanism, we respond to the stimulus of the amount of light that is actually entering our eye. Okay, so the size of the pupil controls the amount of light that will enter the eye, and that is quite logical because again the pupil is like a little hole. So the bigger that hole is, the more light will be able to go through, and the smaller the hole is, less light will go through. And like we also said earlier when we spoke about the function of the iris, we know that the size of this pupil is controlled by the radial and circular muscles of our iris. Okay, so now we are going to look at how this exactly works. So in an environment where we have bright light, so our stimulus is bright light, the pupil will constrict to allow less light to enter the eye, and thus prevents damage to the retina. So if you are in bright light, you want that hole in your pupil to be smaller, so less of that light is able to go through, otherwise the retina will be hurt. So what happens is, number one, the radial muscles will relax. Okay, so this is the radial muscles inside of your iris. They will relax. Sorry, we're on this side in bright light, so they will relax. Okay, but the circular muscles will contract. So that is why these circles are indicated in red. The circular muscles will contract, and these little radial muscles that you can see here, the little stripes, they will relax. And this will cause, number three, the pupil to constrict and become smaller. And number four, because the pupil is now constricted or smaller, less light will be able to enter the eye. So number one, the radial muscles relax. Number two, the circular muscles contract, and this constricts the pupil and makes it smaller, and then less light is able to enter. However, if we are in dim light, the opposite happens. The pupil will dilate to allow more light to enter, and then more light will be able to reach the retina in order to form a clear, sharp image. Okay, so this is if you're in a darker room, your eye wants to get as much light in as possible in order to be able to actually create that clear image. Okay, so first the radial muscles will contract. So these are our radial muscles, these little stripes, and they will basically pull the core of the pupil open. Okay, and the circular muscles will relax in order to prevent the pushing of the pupil closed. So it won't be pushed closed by the circular muscles, that is why they are relaxed, and the radial muscles will contract to pull the pupil open further. Then the pupil will dilate. In other words, it will become larger. And because it is larger, more light is then able to enter it. Then we get to our next thing that happens to our eye. Now this you should not confuse with the previous section on the pupillary mechanism. This is something else entirely, and this is called accommodation. Now accommodation is the ability of the eye to bring nearby objects, in other words objects that is closer to the eye than 6 meters, into focus by changing the shape of the lens. Now, like I explained to you, the lens functions to bend the light. As it enters the eye, it bends the light in order to concentrate here at the back of the retina. Okay? So as you can see here, depending on the distance we are from that object, the light has to be bent slightly differently because the length of the ray differs between a far object and a near object. Okay. So accommodation basically has to do with how this lens is then, how thick or thin it is in order to enable the bending of that light, depending on how far we are from these objects. So the distant object, in other words, an object 6 meters or further, light can be focused on the retina without adaptation. So in this case, we refer to the eye as unaccommodated. The ciliary muscles will relax. So these muscles, they will relax, and the ciliary body will move away from the lens. So they will move away from the lens. The suspensory ligaments are taut and pull on the lens, and this causes more tension on the lens. So these brown ligaments, they are tight and they pull on the lens in order to give it more tension. And because of this, you can think if you were to pull at the top and at the bottom of this lens, it will become flatter. So it becomes less convex. And then less refraction of the light rays will occur. So the light rays are focused on the retina then in order to produce our clear image. So because it is less convex or flatter, there is less refraction of the light. So the light is not bent as much. And then this still causes the light ray to focus back here on the retina, and a clear image is then produced. However, if we have a nearby object, so that's an object closer than 6 meters, the curvature of the lens has to change in order to focus the light on the retina here at the back, and that is what we refer to as this accommodation. Now, unlike when we had unaccommodated eye, in this case, the ciliary muscles will contract, and the ciliary body will move closer to this lens. So they will move closer, and the suspensory ligaments will slacken. So these suspensory ligaments will become less taut. They will not be as tight, and because of that, there is then less tension on this lens, and the lens will become more convex. In other words, it will be a little fatter or a bit more round, and because of this, there is more refraction of light rays by this thick lens. So the light can be bent a bit more in order to focus it on the retina in order to produce a clear image. Okay, so in this case, we have the ciliary muscles contracting, moving closer to the lens, the suspensory ligaments that are slackening, so there will be less tension, the lens will become more convex, so more fat or more rounded, and more refraction of the light rays will occur by this thicker lens, so that then enables the light ray to be focused at the back of our retina. And that is it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we will be looking at some eye defects.